At the altar, my mother said, "We expected better." But the priest's next words silenced her instantly. The church was glowing, bathed in soft sunlight streaming through stained glass windows. I stood at the altar, my heart pounding, my white dress clinging to me like a second skin. This was it. My wedding day. The day every girl dreams of. But something felt off, like a storm cloud lurking just out of sight. I'm Natalie, and this is the story of how my perfect day turned into a battlefield of secrets and shame. Before we get lost in the chaos, let me pause for a second. Where are you watching this from? Drop a comment below with your city or country. Let's see how far this story travels. Now, let's get back to that day, when the air was thick with more than just love. The church was packed. Rows of wooden pews overflowed with family, friends, and a few faces I barely recognized. My fiancé, Ethan, stood beside me, his hand warm in mine, his smile steady but nervous. He looked sharp in his black tux, his dark hair neatly combed, his green eyes catching the light. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, high school sweethearts together for 7 years, building a life in our small town just outside Charleston, South Carolina. But perfection? That's just a pretty lie we tell ourselves. My family was front and center. My mother, Diane, sat in the first row, her lips pressed into a thin line, her perfectly tailored dress screaming money and control. Next to her, my dad, Richard, kept his eyes on his phone, probably checking work emails. My younger sister, Claire, fidgeted with her bracelet, her blonde curls bouncing every time she whispered to her +1. Ethan's family was there too, his mom, Linda, beaming with pride, and his older brother, Mark, who kept stealing glances at his phone, probably betting on football. The guests murmured, their voices a low hum, like bees in a hive. The scent of roses and lavender filled the air, mingling with the faint mustiness of the old church. Everything looked picture-perfect. The white lilies draped over the altar, the soft piano music, the golden glow of candles. But beneath it all, I felt it. A tension, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. I tried to focus on Ethan. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, grounding me. "You okay?" he whispered, his voice low enough for only me to hear. I nodded, forcing a smile. But my stomach churned. My mother's eyes were boring into me, and I could feel Claire's restless energy from across the room. Something was brewing, and I didn't know what. Let's rewind a bit. Ethan and I had planned this wedding for a year. Charleston was our home, and we wanted a classic Southern wedding. Elegant but not flashy, heartfelt but not over the top. We'd saved every penny, planned every detail, from the handwritten invitations to the peach cobbler dessert bar. My mother, though, had opinions. Too many opinions. "Natalie, sweetheart, a backyard wedding vibe? Really?" she'd said, her voice dripping with judgment. "We expected better for you." That phrase stuck with me, like a splinter I couldn't pull out. She wanted a grand venue, a string quartet, a guest list full of her country club friends. I wanted it to be our day, not hers. Ethan backed me up, but every compromise felt like a battle. My dad stayed out of it as usual, and Claire? She just rolled her eyes and said, "Let Mom have her way, Nat. It's easier." But I didn't want easy. I wanted real. Ethan's family was different. His mom, Linda, was warm, always bringing us casseroles and asking about our plans. His brother Mark was quieter, a bit rough around the edges, but he'd always been kind to me. Still, I noticed little things. Mark's odd comments about Ethan's luck in landing me. My mother's snide remarks about Ethan's job as a high school teacher, like it wasn't good enough. Claire's cryptic texts about secrets she couldn't wait to spill. I brushed it all off as wedding stress. Big mistake. At the rehearsal dinner the night before, things started to crack. My mother clinked her glass, standing to give a toast. "To Natalie and Ethan," she said, her smile tight. "May this wedding be everything we hope for." The room cheered, but her words felt like a warning. Claire smirked, sipping her wine. Mark leaned back in his chair, avoiding my eyes. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, but I could tell he felt it too, the weight of something unsaid. Back at the altar, I pushed those memories away. The priest, Father Thomas, began the ceremony, his voice calm and steady. "We gather here to celebrate the union of Natalie and Ethan." I tried to focus on his words. on Ethan's warmth beside me. But my mother's stare was relentless, like she was waiting for something to go wrong. And Claire, why was she whispering to her date again? My heart raced. This was supposed to be my day, but it felt like everyone else was holding the script. The church felt smaller as the ceremony went on, like the walls were closing in. Father Thomas's voice droned softly, reading from his worn leather book, but I could barely hear him over the pounding in my chest. Ethan's hand was still in mine, steady as ever, but my eyes kept darting to the front row. My mother, Diane, sat rigid, her manicured nails tapping her purse. Claire whispered something to her date, her lips curling into a smirk that sent a shiver down my spine. What was she up to? I tried to focus on Ethan, on the vows we'd written, on the life we were about to start. But the air was thick with something unspoken, like a storm about to break. Father Thomas asked us to face each other, and Ethan's green eyes locked onto mine. "You're beautiful," he mouthed, his smile soft but tight at the edges. I wanted to believe everything was fine, that this was just nerves. But then I heard it, a low murmur from the back of the church. Heads turned just for a second before snapping back to us. My stomach twisted. What were they whispering about? The first real crack came during the readings. My cousin Sarah stepped up to the podium, her voice shaky but sweet as she read a passage about love and trust. She was halfway through when Claire let out a loud sigh, audible enough to make Sarah pause. A few guests shifted in their seats, exchanging glances. My mother's lips twitched, like she was holding back a comment. Ethan's mom, Linda, shot Claire a look, but my sister just shrugged, flipping her hair like she didn't care. I felt heat creep up my neck. Why was she acting like this? After Sarah sat down, Father Thomas called for the next reading. Mark, Ethan's brother, stood up, adjusting his tie. He cleared his throat, his voice gruff. "Love is patient. Love is kind," he began, but his eyes kept flicking to the side toward Claire. My sister leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand, watching him like a cat eyeing a mouse. The tension was palpable, like a wire stretched too tight. Mark stumbled over a word, then recovered, but his face was flushed when he sat down. Something was off. I could feel it in my bones. Ethan squeezed my hand, pulling my attention back to him. "Ignore them," he whispered, his voice low and steady. But how could I? The whispers were growing, soft but persistent, like static in the background. I caught snippets. My mother's friend Ellen, murmuring to the woman next to her, something about not the right match. My dad was still glued to his phone, oblivious, but I saw Claire lean over to him, whispering something that made his jaw tighten. What was she saying? The ceremony moved to the exchange of vows, and I went first. My voice shook as I read from the paper in my hands, the words we'd spent weeks perfecting. "Ethan, you're my home, my safe place, my everything." I meant every word, but my eyes kept darting to my mother. She wasn't smiling. She was staring at Ethan, her gaze cold and sharp like she was dissecting him. When I finished, the guests clapped politely, but her hands stayed folded in her lap. My heart sank. Why couldn't she just be happy for me? Ethan's vows were next. His voice was steady, warm, like he was speaking only to me. "Natalie, I promise to stand by you, to fight for us, no matter what." His words were a lifeline, but as he spoke, I heard a scoff, sharp, deliberate. It came from Claire. My sister, my own blood, sitting there with a smirk like she knew something I didn't. A few guests turned to look at her, but she just raised an eyebrow, daring them to say something. Ethan faltered for a split second, his eyes flicking to her, but he pushed through, finishing his vows with a quiet strength that made my chest ache. The tension was suffocating now. Every glance, every whisper, felt like a needle pricking my skin. I wanted to scream, to demand what was going on, but I was trapped at the altar, the center of everyone's attention. Father Thomas moved on, asking if anyone had objections to our marriage. The church went silent, the kind of silence that feels like it's holding its breath. I braced myself, half expecting someone to stand up. No one did, but I saw Claire lean toward her date again, whispering something that made him chuckle. My mother's eyes narrowed and Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What were they hiding? As Father Thomas continued, preparing to bless the rings, I caught a look between Claire and my mother, a quick, knowing glance that made my blood run cold. They were planning something. I could feel it. Ethan's hand tightened around mine, like he sensed it too. The ceremony was supposed to be sacred, a moment of joy, but it felt like a stage for something ugly, something ready to explode. Every second that ticked by pulled the knot in my stomach tighter. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew it wasn't good. The church was a pressure cooker, every breath heavy with anticipation. Father Thomas held the rings in his hands, his voice calm as he blessed them, but I could barely hear him over the roar of my own heartbeat. Ethan's hand was still in mine, his grip firm but trembling slightly. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. My mother's stare burned into me, her lips pressed so tightly they were almost white. Claire sat forward, her eyes gleaming with something I couldn't place. Amusement? Malice? I didn't know, but it made my skin crawl. Father Thomas handed Ethan my ring, and he turned to me, his voice steady as he began, "With this ring, I thee wed." His words were soft, meant only for me, but they felt like a lifeline in a room full of sharks. I tried to focus on his face, on the love in his eyes, but movement in the front row caught my attention. My mother stood up, slowly, deliberately, her heels clicking against the wooden floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the quiet church. Every head turned. Ethan froze, the ring halfway to my finger. Father Thomas paused, his eyebrows lifting slightly, but he didn't speak. The guests held their breath, their eyes darting between my mother and me. I felt like I was falling, the ground slipping out from under me. "Diane, sit down," my dad hissed, his voice low but sharp. She ignored him, smoothing her dress as she stepped into the aisle. "Natalie," she said, her voice clear and cutting, loud enough for every corner of the church to hear. "We need to talk about this. Now." Her words hit like a slap, and a gasp rippled through the crowd. Ethan's mom, Linda, clutched her purse, her face pale. Mark looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Claire, though? She was smirking, her arms crossed like she was watching a show she'd scripted herself. "Mom, what are you doing?" I managed, my voice shaking. I could feel tears prickling behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not now. Ethan stepped closer, his shoulder brushing mine, like he was shielding me from whatever was coming. But nothing could have prepared me for her next words. "We expected better," she said, her eyes locked on Ethan, not me. "This marriage, it's a mistake. He's not good enough for you, Natalie. He's not what you think." The words landed like a bomb, and the church erupted in murmurs. Someone coughed. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Ethan's face went white, his jaw tight, but he didn't look away from me. "Mrs. Harper, this isn't the time," Ethan said, his voice low but firm, trying to keep the peace. But my mother wasn't done. She took another step forward, her chin raised, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're a teacher, Ethan. A small-town teacher with no ambition, no future. My daughter deserves more than a life of scraping by, pretending everything's fine." The cruelty in her tone was like a knife, slicing through the air, through me, through everything we'd built. The guests were frozen, some leaning forward, others looking away, embarrassed but unable to stop watching. My dad grabbed her arm, his face red. "Diane, enough!" But she shook him off, her eyes never leaving Ethan. Claire was practically glowing now, her smirk widening. I wanted to scream, to run, to make this stop. But I was rooted to the spot, my dress suddenly feeling like it weighed 1,000 pounds. And then Father Thomas spoke. His voice was calm but commanding, cutting through the chaos like a beacon. "Mrs. Harper," he said, stepping forward, his hands raised slightly. "You've had your say, but this is God's house, and this moment belongs to Natalie and Ethan. If you cannot respect their love, you will respect this sanctuary." The church went dead silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. My mother's face flushed, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for a comeback but finding none. Father Thomas turned to me, his eyes kind but firm. "Natalie, do you choose this man, Ethan, to be your husband?" It wasn't part of the script, not yet, but it was a challenge, a lifeline. My mother's words echoed in my head. We expected better, but I looked at Ethan, at the man who'd loved me through every storm, who'd held me when I cried, who'd laughed with me over late-night pizza. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. "Yes," I said, my voice steady now, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I choose him." Ethan's eyes softened, a small smile breaking through the tension. The guests let out a collective breath, some clapping softly, others murmuring in approval. My mother stood there stunned, her face a mix of anger and humiliation. Claire's smirk faltered, her eyes narrowing. Mark looked away, his hands clenched in his lap. Father Thomas nodded, his voice warm but final. "Then let us continue." He handed me Ethan's ring and I slipped it onto his finger, my hands steady despite the chaos. The room was still buzzing, but it didn't matter. I'd made my choice, and no one, not my mother, not Claire, not anyone, could take that from me. The church was still reeling from my mother's outburst and Father Thomas's sharp rebuke. The air felt electric, like the moment after a lightning strike. Ethan's ring was on his finger now, and mine sparkled on my hand, but the weight of my mother's words, "We expected better," hung over us like a dark cloud. I glanced at Ethan, his jaw still tight, his eyes fixed on Father Thomas as the priest resumed the ceremony. The guests were restless, shifting in their seats, whispering in hushed tones. My mother had sat down, her face a mask of barely contained fury, her hands clenched in her lap. Claire's smirk was gone, replaced by a sullen pout, like a child caught misbehaving. My dad stared at the floor, his phone forgotten, his shoulders slumped. Father Thomas pressed on, his voice steady, guiding us through the final blessings. "May this union be a testament to love, resilience, and forgiveness," he said, his eyes sweeping the room, lingering just a moment on my mother. The guests murmured in agreement, some nodding, others still stealing glances at the front row. Ethan's mom, Linda, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her smile soft but proud. Mark, though, was still avoiding my gaze, his hands fidgeting like he was hiding something. I wanted to believe the worst was over, but my gut told me the fallout was just beginning. When Father Thomas pronounced us husband and wife, the room erupted in applause, loud, almost desperate, like they were trying to drown out the tension. Ethan pulled me close, his lips brushing mine in a kiss that felt like a promise. For a moment, it was just us, the world fading away. But as we turned to face the crowd, I saw my mother stand again, her face pale but composed. She didn't clap, she didn't smile, she just walked out, her heels echoing in the now quiet church. My dad hesitated, then followed her, his head bowed. Claire stayed seated, her arms crossed, her eyes burning into me. The guests noticed, their applause faltering, replaced by awkward murmurs. The reception was supposed to be the victory lap, a lively party at a nearby barn venue with string lights, mason jar centerpieces, and a playlist we'd curated for months. But as we stepped into the warm evening air, the mood was heavy. Guests milled around, sipping drinks, their smiles forced. "Congratulations," they said, but their eyes kept darting to my mother, who stood by the bar, a glass of wine in her hand, talking in low tones to her friend Ellen. Claire was nearby, laughing too loudly with her date, like she was trying to prove she didn't care. Ethan's family tried to keep things light. Linda hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're perfect for him, Natalie." But Mark was nowhere to be seen. Halfway through the reception, I overheard Ellen talking to another guest. "Diane's just protective," she said, her voice low. "She heard things about Ethan, rumors, you know. She didn't want Natalie trapped." My blood ran cold. "Rumors? What rumors?" I pulled Ethan aside, my voice shaking. "What's she talking about?" I asked. He looked confused, then angry. "I don't know, Nat. She's been against me from the start. You know that." But there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Worry, maybe? I wanted to press him, but the band started playing, and we were pulled onto the dance floor. Later, I confronted Claire. She was leaning against a table, her third glass of champagne in hand. "What's your problem?" I demanded, my voice low but sharp. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling. "Oh, Nat, don't be so dramatic. Mom's just looking out for you. We all know Ethan's not exactly Prince Charming." Her words stung, but before I could respond, Mark appeared, his face flushed. "Claire, drop it," he snapped, his voice rough. She laughed, sharp and cruel. "Oh, Mark, don't act innocent. You know what I'm talking about." My heart stopped. What did they know? What weren't they saying? The night ended with Ethan and me driving away, tin cans rattling behind our car, but the joy was tainted. My mother's words, Claire's smirks, Mark's silence, they lingered like a bad dream. In the weeks that followed, I cut contact with my mother. She sent a half-hearted apology text, but it felt hollow. Claire never apologized, and I haven't spoken to her since. Ethan and I moved forward, stronger for it, but I still wonder about those rumors. He swears there's nothing to them, and I believe him. I have to. Looking back, I realize weddings don't just bring people together. They expose cracks, old wounds, hidden truths. My mother thought she was saving me, but all she did was show her own fears, her own failures. Love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing someone, flaws and all, and standing by them when the world tries to tear you apart. That day, I chose Ethan, and I'd choose him again. What about you? What would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment below. Did you side with Natalie, or did her mother have a point? And if you loved this story, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep sharing these moments that make us human.